As you know, these events are being held in partnership with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The series of events feature guest speakers from around the country sharing how they or their organizations they are with are coping with COVID-19. Before we get started, I do want to let everybody know that this call is being recorded and will be posted to the NCC COVID web page within usually 3 business days, along with the slide deck. So what's a little bit about the agenda and what this call is all about today. We have a speaker today, Patricia Smith. She's the founder of the Compassion Fatigue Awareness Project. She's going to be talking to us today about recognizing and managing compassion fatigue. Right now, everybody all participants are muted upon entry, but we do want to hear from you. So as the presentation is going on, if you would like to submit your questions, we would really encourage you to submit them via the Q&A or the chat section. And at the end of the presentation, as time allows, we will get through as many of the questions that have come in as possible. So what are these calls about? You've probably been on them before. We hold them every other week. Twice a month, we are holding the professional COVID-19 calls. We hear from different stakeholders and peers in the ESRD community who are adapting to COVID-19. They are sharing examples and are providing real-world strategies for facilities and stakeholders to use. So let me go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. We are pleased to announce we have Patricia Smith. As I mentioned, she is the founder of the Compassion Fatigue Awareness Project. She is a certified compassion fatigue specialist. She has been writing, speaking, and facilitating workshops on the subject nationally and internationally for the past 20 years. She has authored 5 books and training materials on the subject. Her latest book is entitled Stress, Burnout, and Compassion Fatigue Handling in Veterinary Practice. It's published by Grupo ASIC, an international publishing specializing in veterinarian medicine books and materials. And again, today, Ms. Smith will discuss compassion fatigue in the workplace and prevent different strategies to promote the wellness. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over the call to Patricia Smith. Patricia, I think you're still on mute.
How's that?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. I'm looking at the cover here, the first slide, and it's January 13th. I want to thank Stephanie for our blip and having to change it. We were without power for 20 hours, and you kind of forget what it's like not to have electricity. It was really something. I'm up here in the San Juan Islands in the state of Washington. We're a 1-hour ferry ride from Canada. So we're very, very close to the border, and there's 5 islands up here that have people on them, and I'm on the largest one, San Juan Island. So oftentimes when I set up something, either our computers aren't working, and it's kind of rough because I come from San Francisco. I've only been up here for 5 years, and I'm so used to San Francisco and Silicon Valley and everything working. So I'm pleased to be here today, and I thank all of you for tuning in. It's toward the end of your day. It's only noon up here. But thank you very much for tuning in, because I just can't tell you how important this subject is right now. The trauma that we've all been experienced, no matter what your political leanings, no matter what you think about things, you're being traumatized. And those of you who work in caregiving, fields are being traumatized by the work you do on top of everything else. So thank you for taking the time. I'm going to ask you to take a nice deep breath. Exhale, relax, sit back, just take all this information in for the next 45, 50 minutes. And then if you have questions at the end, maybe I can help you with them. So with that, I'll ask Stephanie to give us the agenda, which is the next slide. So we're going to talk about what is compassion fatigue, on-the-job stresses and burnout. A lot of people, in your training, I'm sure you know about all these things. I try to put it in very, very simple terms so everyone can understand what all these things are: post-traumatic stress, stresses, burnout, compassion fatigue, and how they differ. Compassion fatigue in the workplace, managing it, strategies, and what I've been adding for the last probably 2 months to my webinar is post-pandemic caregiver recovery. And boy, are we all going to need that. And we need to start now. And people say to me, how can I start now when I'm still, grappling with everything? It's absolutely important that we start our recovery process now from all the trauma, because it's going to be a long haul for all of us. Next slide. So life is not merely to be alive, but to be well. This was written in the 4th century, and this is sort of the highlight of what I talk about, because good health is being free of disease, and that's wonderful. We all definitely want to be free of disease, especially free of COVID. But when we talk about wellness, we're talking about something totally different. Next slide. Wellness is all about thriving, and that's what we want to do. University of California, Davis Student Health and Wellness Services gives us this wonderful, explanation of what wellness is. It's an active process of becoming aware of and making choices toward a healthy and fulfilling life. Wellness is more than being free from illness. It's a dynamic process of growth and change. And we all want that for our lives. And we're going to see a lot of change and hopefully a lot of growth when we get this pandemic under, control, and hopefully things calm down as far as politics, and we'll be able to focus on ourselves and change for the better and continue to grow so we have a fulfilling, happy life. Next one. So it isn't easy to do what I'm going to ask you to do. I've been in this process for 20 years of my life. There's 7 forms of human wellness, and we need to approach each different form and do something positive for ourselves. There's the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, social, intellectual, environmental, and occupational. Those are all parts of who we are, and we need to really look at each part and say, what can I do in that area to take out any negativity or things that aren't working for me, and how do we make them positive in our lives and change for the better? And we'll be talking more about that as we go on. Next slide. So what is it? Compassion fatigue is a broadly defined concept that can include emotional, physical, and spiritual distress in those providing care to others. It is associated with caregiving where people or animals are experiencing significant emotional or physical pain and suffering. And as caregivers, we bear witness to that pain and suffering. I always talk about the 2 words, empathetic and compassionate. We're empathetic people. And what that means is that we open our hearts to the pain and suffering of others. Not everybody does that, which is often surprising to some people. Caregivers do that. And then they're compassionate. And compassionate means seeing the pain and suffering, or act to change that and relieve some of the suffering. And that's what you do every single day. So you're empathetic and compassionate caregivers. Next slide. So what are the issues associated with it? Compassion fatigue and its kin, such as secondary traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress, empathic distress, vicarious trauma, create issues in our lives. These are all terms that psychologists and psychiatrists use, which I'm not. Actually, I'm a journalist by trade. I've learned all of this through 20 years in working with Dr. Charles Figley and Dr. Beth Hudnall-Stamm and the people that are the ones who describe what these things are. And they're having a heck of a time because all of these things seem to have a lot of things in common, and they do. And so I put this in here because I want you to know, if you hear someone say, oh, I'm suffering vicarious trauma, they basically have compassion fatigue. They're traumatized by what they're experiencing. So providing authentic, sustainable self-care daily can help manage and lessen the disruptive issues associated with compassion fatigue. And that's what we'll be talking about. Next slide. So what are those symptoms? It's a very specific set of symptoms. Usually when I speak in front of groups, I see the heads going up and down because they recognize the symptoms in themselves or others. Isolation. First thing is you want to isolate. You've got too many people coming at you. You need to be alone. You're overwhelmed by too much to do. Emotional outbursts. And how does this happen? Oftentimes, if you have high levels of compassion fatigue, some of it started in early childhood, where perhaps you were an early childhood caregiver or child caregiver. There might have been dysfunction in your family, and I always say don't be shamed by that. We all have some sort of dysfunction in our family, but if you're the one who's taking care of everyone else, you learn to push it down and push it down. And one day the human body says, I've had enough of this, and you have an emotional outburst. You have sadness, you feel apathetic, you have those persistent physical ailments. You go to the doctors and you say, I've had this headache for a couple of weeks, and my back hurts, and my shoulders are aching, and I have some gastrointestinal problems. And the doctor does a bunch of tests and checks you out, and he says, there's really nothing wrong with you. It could very well be the symptoms of compassion fatigue that are causing the human body to hurt. The headache, the scratchy throat, lower backache, gastrointestinal problems, back of the neck aching. Those are all the stress points of the human body. And if you're carrying more than you should be carrying, they're going to rear up and cause you physical ailments. Substance abuse. We know that this is a huge problem worldwide, but particularly in the United States. We're all self-medicating, and oftentimes we're not self-medicating with good things like exercise and nutrition and being with, positive, happy people. We're reaching for the tobacco and the alcohol and the chocolate and too much computer and all of those things. So we want to learn to change that and not reach for the things that are more, disruptive to our good health. You have hypervigilance or hyperarousal. And where I see this is with emergency specialists, the emergency room doctors, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, firefighters. They're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so their bodies are kept in hypervigilance and hyperarousal, which is very, very unhealthy for our human bodies. You have recurring nightmares or flashbacks. And I often tell people when you have nightmares or flashbacks, you probably should go for some help because it's very hard to get out of that by yourself. You often need the help of a mental health professional to get you through that and how to deal with it. And, what it does is it disrupts your rest. And that's probably the number one thing that will help all of us with our trauma and our exhaustion and everything else we're feeling is to get good rest. Excessive complaints about colleagues, management, and those being helped. And what that's about is that we have all of these feelings inside, all of these emotions, and perhaps we haven't learned healthy ways of letting go of those emotions. So what we do is we want to get them out because they make us feel so uncomfortable. They go through our bodies and they give us headaches and they give us thoughts that we don't want to think. And so what do? We think by putting it out there and perhaps putting it on another person, it will go away. But unfortunately, that's not the way to take care of it. And again, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Next slide. So how do we get this? Why do some people have high levels of compassion fatigue and some people don't? You can have people that work in caregiving environments and they don't suffer from it at all. And I've met many are that way, but some of us, unfortunately, do. It's about other directedness. Somewhere along the line, we learn to put the needs of others before our own needs. So we're always looking out there. There's the problems, the solutions, everything is out there instead of inside. And as we all know, everything is resolved from the inside out, not from the outside in. Providing service to others with stress and work-related trauma. And boy, are we seeing that now with all of the caregivers such as yourself who are working in particularly healthcare with COVID. There's no time to stop and take a deep breath and exhale and take a little walk or do that. There's no time for that. So they're all providing service with that stress and trauma going on in their lives. Lack of personal or professional coping skills. Again, this is probably from childhood where we never learned personal coping skills or professional coping skills. But the good news about that is you can learn them at any age, and that's a good thing. We can learn all kinds of new tricks, to help us be well. The lack of personal boundaries, and this is probably one of the most important. People with high levels of compassion fatigue allow everything and everyone into their lives because they want to help. And it's very uncomfortable when you go through the process of becoming self-directed instead of other-directed because you want to help other people, but you have to realize that you need to bring your personal boundaries in. You have to decide what you will and won't allow in your life. And oftentimes that can be very painful. I know in my own life over the years I've had to let go of long-term friendships, but they were not healthy friendships. And we had a long history together, and it was very painful to say goodbye to them, but I had to. And my life improved 100% by not having that in my life. And oftentimes people say, well, what if it's my husband or wife? And then I say, well, then you've got some critical conversations that have to happen if it's someone that close to you. You have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. Again, this probably comes from early childhood, where we feel like we're responsible for everything because someone has put us in that position of being responsible. Practice of minimizing traumatic events. I see this all the time. It's like, yeah, we went through a really rough time there, but it didn't bother me at all. Well, it's a sense of denial. The things that we're experiencing these days are traumatizing all of us. Some handle it better than others, but we're all being traumatized. And that history of unresolved childhood trauma, the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. I think people for a long time thought that we grew out of those traumatic events in our childhood, but now, of course, we know that's not true. We carry them into adulthood, and they rear their ugly heads in many, many ways. Next slide. Our friend Sigmund Freud said, unexpressed emotions will never die. They're buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. And this is what's so shocking about, compassion fatigue. I'll have people come up after a presentation and say, boy, I really understand that about the emotional outburst. I was with some colleagues of mine and someone said something and all of a sudden all this stuff came pouring out and I was shocked. And that's what happens. The human body just says, I've had enough. And it takes over. The brain takes over and it comes out your mouth, unfortunately. Next slide. So stress is leading to high levels. We have stress, which is too much. We've got too much coming at us. We've got too many clients, too many patients, too many directives, too much coming at us. Burnout is just the opposite. All of a sudden, it's too little. It's being worn out. Work-related hopelessness, feelings of inefficacy. Too little. We have too little time, too little help, too little finances, perhaps, in your department. And then we burn out. PTSD, we've learned so much about that since the wounded warriors have come back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And that is, of course, your primary stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that happens to you. Something extreme happens to you and you feel it, you see it, you experience it. Perhaps you have wounds from it, but it happens to you. Secondary traumatic stress happens to someone else. And as a caregiver, we listen or we witness the pain and suffering of others, and we take it on as our own. And the way I like to explain it is primary stress, you're driving to work, and you have a fender bender. And you go into work, and you find your best friend, and you say, oh, I just had a fender bender. I'm shaking. The back of my neck hurts. I think I hurt myself. My partner's going to be mad because our insurance is going to go up. I'm going to have to get a car while my car goes into the shop. You feel it yourself. The person listening to it, if you don't have good boundaries and you don't take it on as your own, you take it on as your own and you become traumatized by it as well, because your brain automatically goes to the time that you had that, little accident and it hooks on to that. So you don't want to do that. You want to listen with compassion and help any way you can, but you don't want to take it on as your own. The stress that others are feeling belongs to them, and the stress that we feel belongs to us, and we don't need to mix the two. Next slide. A history of trauma. I just found this not long ago, and boy, it really made sense to me. A history of trauma can give you a high tolerance for emotional pain. Just because you can take it doesn't mean you have to. And unfortunately, I think that's what a lot of caregivers in all of the helping professions are feeling right now. They're being traumatized over and over again, and they feel that they have to take it because that's what they are, and that's what we're dealing with COVID. But you don't have to take it. You have to learn to protect yourself. If you don't take care of yourself, you really have nothing left to give others. And oftentimes what I hear from people in presentations and questions and answers is, but when I do think about myself, I feel so guilty and I feel self-centered and I feel selfish. And that's something that you have to work to let go of, because it's not selfish. You take care of yourself, you have wellness, you have good health, and then you can take care of others even better. Next slide. So how do you manage stress? First of all, you have to label your source of stress. Oftentimes people, I don't pretend to be a psychologist or a therapist, but oftentimes people will say, I'm so stressed. And I just ask them simply, well, what's causing you so much stress? They haven't got a clue. They say, I don't know everything. Well, the first thing you need to do is identify and label your stress, because you can't do anything about it until you give it a name. If it's in your workplace, if it's your manager, if it's your colleagues, if it's the work itself, if it's someone at home that's making your work life difficult, you go into work exhausted because of what's going on, you need to label that, and then you need to figure out something to do about it. Accept what you cannot change. I don't know how much we can change COVID. I don't think anybody knows. We think wearing masks and social distancing and now vaccines are going to help us. We don't really know what's in the future. We can only hope that science is right and that it will get better, and that history has taught us that we can make it better. We have to focus on what we can change. We can learn to say no. Caregivers have a very difficult time saying no, but there are very gracious ways to say no. Tighten those personal boundaries. Make your life simpler, and practice empathic discernment. Next slide. Empathic discernment is knowing when you're hurting, and you have to do this 24/7, 365 days a year. You have to protect yourself all the time, because what's going on at work, you're bringing home, and what's happening at home, you're bringing into work. We're holistic human beings, body, mind, and spirit. So wherever we go, we bring who we are. So we want to be the best we can be, so we bring our best selves, particularly to our caregiving. Next slide. So identify those unhealthy coping methods and adopt new ones. These are just some ideas. If you have thoughts, find evidence, facts to disprove your negative thinking. If you want to release emotions, so you have to label what you want to do. Go for a walk. Being outside in the fresh air will help you to release emotions. And realize that life is good, and that it doesn't have to be so serious and so exhausting and difficult. Practice self-love. Take that hot bath. When you can, get a massage, get your hair cut, go out for a nice meal, those kind of things to take care of yourself and nurture yourself. This isn't selfish. This is a good thing. If you need to be distracted from those thoughts, grab a book or listen to music. The studies about what music does to our brain are just phenomenal. The neuroscientists are telling us that the minute you put on those earbuds and you listen to Bach, Beethoven, or Green Day, or Bohemian Rhapsody, it switches your brain. So one thing to do is to have, headphones handy. If you're really feeling, stressed or the trauma's getting to you, put on some music. It will calm you down. And you don't have to do it for a long time, because people say, well, I can't do that at work. You can for 30 seconds. And believe me, that little short time will help. Discover your best self. Well, I don't have to talk about this to you, because you are your best self in what you do with your life. And then grounding. And that's that getting to the center again, where you feel like everything is balanced. And that's where your meditation, your yoga, those kind of things, the mindfulness, come into play. And they help exponentially people that are doing that, particularly meditation. Next slide. So strategies for managing compassion fatigue. Somehow you need to create a balance. And this is really, really difficult. People ask all the time, well, how do I do that? And I say, I know what works for me, but you have to find out what works for you. I can tell you what I do, but then you have to do what works for you. So somehow you have to create a balance. Accept that your situation is stressful. You can exhale. You're living in a very, very difficult situation right now. Build a healthy support system. Go to the people that are supportive and positive and see life as good, because if you go to the downers, it's only going to bring you down. Practice authentic, sustainable self-care daily. You have to do these things every single day. And I know it's difficult right now with everybody trying to teach children at home and go to work and keep all the relationships going and all of that. I'm not saying these things, that they're easy. They're very difficult. But you have to find out what works for you every single day, something that gives you joy, whether it's reading, writing, talking to a friend, cooking, running, whatever it is. Do more of it, but make sure it's authentic to you and make sure it's sustainable. because we'll get over this traumatic event, but another one will come along. Stay in the complexity, practice mindfulness, practice that self-compassion. I can't say enough about that. Go easy on yourself. If you've had a bad day, accept the fact that you've had a bad day, and it's okay. We all have bad days, but we also have good days. Acknowledge others who are feeling the same. If you see one of your colleagues or friend, relative, neighbor, ask, are you feeling okay? Is everything okay? And unfortunately, caregivers will always say, oh yeah, everything's fine. Well, ask a second question. Are you sure? Because it will help people to know that you care and that we're all in this together. Strengthen your resiliency skills. I've done it before, I can do it again. Remind yourself of that. Enhance your communication skills to lessen the feelings of being unheard. This is particularly true in the workplace, and it might be true in your personal lives too. But learn about good, effective communication, how to express yourself honestly and simply so others can get what you're saying and hopefully help you. And take the professional quality of life self-test regularly. Next slide. This is the work, the life's work of Dr. Beth Stam. Dr. Beth is now retired in Montana, but she's still doing her good work. And this is basically the measurable that we all use. It's free. It's on my website. I'll give you the link to it at the end of this. But it gives you some good information. It gives you your compassion satisfaction levels, which is the good stuff. But it also gives you the bad stuff, your burnout level and your secondary traumatic level, which is your compassion fatigue. So it's free. It's in about 10 languages. I take it myself every 6 months because compassion fatigue never goes away. You might feel like you're doing really well and taking care of yourself, but then when some trauma comes up or you've got extra work to do or you're feeling exhausted, the symptoms of compassion fatigue will sneak in. It's a very sneaky thing. You'll look at and say, I can't believe what just came out of my mouth. I better take that test and see what my levels are. Like I said, I've been taking it for 20 years. I first found out about it the first day I learned about compassion fatigue. I was working in animal welfare work, and I was suggested to go take this test, and that's where I found out that I suffered from very, very high levels of compassion fatigue. So it's been a 20-year journey for me. And this test, and then I got to know Dr. Beth very, very well, and she's just a wonderful person. So I highly recommend you take it. And like I said, I'll give you the link at the end. Next slide. So what is compassion satisfaction that we talk about? Very simply, it's the pleasure you derive from doing the caregiving work that you do. Higher levels of compassion satisfaction leads to becoming healthier, more effective caregivers. And it can be anything. Next slide. Compassion satisfaction can be whatever it is to you. Working with dedicated colleagues, being part of a close-knit community, providing the highest level of support for high patient satisfaction, or living the mission of your organization. Oftentimes in a group, I haven't done any person-to-person presentations since February, but in a group I'll ask, what provides your compassion satisfaction? Why do you keep going to work and doing what you're doing? And people are just wonderful. This one woman I remember, she just, raised her hand and waved her hands. And so I called on her and she said, oh, this isn't the healthiest thing. She says, but I have to tell you, every Monday my organization provides donuts with our coffee. And she said, it's not just the donuts. It's that everybody kind of hangs around a little bit longer and we share, stories together. And it starts off the day really well. So something like that. Another woman I remember, she said, well, during the week I have to wear a suit and nylons. And she said, we have dress down Friday. And she said, I still look nice. I wear nice jeans and a blazer. She said, but I just love Fridays because I can be more casual. So it can be anything you want it to be. And figuring out what brings your compassion satisfaction is very, very important. It can be the history of your organization. It can be the building itself. If you're in a nice new building and you've got a beautiful office. So you get the idea. It's anything that brings you happiness, pleasure, and satisfaction from what you do. Next slide. I'm not going to go through these, but these are the mission statements of your organizations that I believe are on this call. And it's very, very important you know what that mission statement is, because your mission statement is your brand. It's telling the world who you are. And one thing when I work with HR people, one of the things I always tell them, when you're going, the best way to get good hires is when they first come into your office, ask them if their personal goals and values align with the mission of the organization. And if they say, well, I don't know what the mission of the organization is, perhaps they didn't do that, have copies of it ready and have them read it, give them a few minutes and have them think about it. And the reason is this, and I've seen it so many times, particularly in animal welfare work, if indeed you don't align with the mission of the organizations, what you're going to do is you're going to go into that organization and you're going to try to change it to align with your values and your mission, your personal mission. And that creates chaos, and it creates time-consuming chaos. And it also involves your bottom line. You want everyone on board who believes in the mission of the organization and they work toward it. I mean, I believe in this enough that I tell people you should probably print out the mission of your organization and put it somewhere where you can see it. And you all have excellent mission statements. I've seen some that are a page long, and if that's too much, it has to be. Look, at the mission of the ESRD is to promote healthcare for all patients that is safe, effective, efficient, patient-centered, timely, and equitable. That is so clear and concise. I don't think anyone could be, confused about exactly what you're trying to do in your organization. So get to know your mission statement and live it. It's very, very important for both the organization and for yourself. You'll be happier and higher levels of compassion satisfaction if you align with the mission of the organization that you're working for. Okay, next slide. So organizational compassion fatigue, I'm just going to touch on this very, very generally and quickly. There is such a thing as organizational compassion fatigue, and it exists when a high percentage of the staff have high levels of compassion fatigue. And this can really, again, cause dysfunction in the organization and leads to loss of the meaning of the mission, which is so important. Next slide. So what does it look like? High absenteeism. And that's a real problem because Harvard, I think it was, did a study to see what causes the most stress in the American workplace. And the number one answer is being asked to do something that you're not trained to do. And this is exactly what high absenteeism causes. Say Mary has had a headache for 3 days because she has high levels of compassion fatigue and she's just feeling terrible. And so she's not going to go into work. She's just not able to do it. So what happens is you go into work, you go in the door and your supervisor's there and says, you have to do Mary's work today. Some of her work today. And you say, but I'm not trained to do Mary's work. And she says, well, that's okay. You'll learn. Well, yeah, you'll learn, but there'll be a high rate of stress and nervousness about, doing someone else's job that you're not trained to do. So high absenteeism is the first thing. Elevated rate of workers' compensation claims. And when I work with presidents and directors and CEOs of organizations, this one really opens their eyes. They'll be doodling on something, and when I say this, then their eyes come up to me because they're very worried about their bottom line. And when you're paying claims all the time, it's going to affect your bottom line. There's a lack of flexibility. Everybody put their heels in and they don't want to change because it takes too much work. Tendency to break rules. The us versus them mentality, and that's that other directedness. All of the problems are out there. Strong reluctance to change. A lack of vision for the future, and of course, undermining that mission of the organization. Next slide. So here are some on-the-spot self-care practices that have been shared. When I do presentations, I learn so much more from you than you learn from me, and these kind of things I jot them down all the time when people come up and talk to me and share stories and things because it's so very important to share what works for us because then other people might say, that might work for me. I'm going to try that. Number one, breathe deeply. And this is something I've only taken up this last year because I always thought it was kind of silly, to be honest with you. How can that help? Well, now that I know more about it and I use it as an on-the-spot self-care practice, it relaxes your whole body. It's nature's way of relaxing us. And the one, Dr. Andrew Weil has the 4-7-8 exercise. So for 4 counts, you breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold it for 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you expel it for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And by the time you do that, you will notice you have relaxed tremendously. And you do it 3 times, and it will really make a difference. And the good thing is you can do it no matter what the situation. There might be others around you, but you can still do it without, causing too much attention to yourself. Laughter is always healing and a good thing. Journaling, Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way, the morning pages. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but in her book, The Artist's Way, she talks about morning pages where you take every morning when you wake up, first thing, you have 3 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper and a pen or pencil next to you, and you just unload everything you're thinking, everything you're feeling onto that paper. And when I first started doing this, I did it for several years. I just thought I'll never be able to fill 3 pages when I first wake up. Well, I could have gone on for 5 or 10 pages. And the good thing about it is you can say anything you want. You can name names. You can use words you normally wouldn't use. You can do whatever you want because no one's ever going to see it. After you finish your 3 pages, you get rid of it. However you do, make sure no one else sees it, tear it up, shred it. And what that does is it takes what's inside and puts it on the outside. It's a form of letting go. And it's so very important. Journaling has become a very, very big thing for good reason. It works. Take that brisk walk. Oftentimes in a work environment, you can't say, oh, I'm going to go for a walk while everyone else is working. But if you can, or you have a buddy system where you ask someone to, watch the phone while you just go out for a couple of minutes, it makes a big difference. There's a big world out there. Stretch, so good for the body. Get up and stretch and walk around. We should all be doing that anyway, at least once an hour. Talk to that trusted friend who just nods and understands and listens with compassion. Eat a nutritious snack. Meditate, pray, whatever you call that, where you center yourself. Read a favorite quote. I have a whole book of quotes. Oh my goodness, I've been saving quotes for 20 years. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just open the book, my quote book, and go to a quote, and it will be exactly what I need to read. It's kind of an amazing thing. Or read your mission statement to remind you why you're there. Listen to music. Employ calming visualization. Take a minute, close your eyes, think about a beautiful lake, think about beautiful clouds, think about climbing a mountain. It's all authentic to you. It gets to be what you want it to be. And practice letting go rituals. And this is something to help let go of the trauma, which we're all going to have to do a lot of. And I have one story I always tell because it's my favorite. I ask people, about what they do as a letting go ritual. And it's a psychological thing, but it works. And one was a young social worker, and they're so wonderfully idealistic. And she said, I was spending too much time at work, and I've got the pager and the beeper and the cell phone and all of that. And I've got 2 little children and a husband and a dog. And she said, my husband was always getting home before me. And he met me at the door with, the baby on the hip and the other one hanging on his leg and the dog barking and tapping his foot. And she said, I knew if I didn't do something about this, that I was going to be in trouble in my marriage, that it was taking over and I wasn't present for them. So what she decided to do, she said she drives into her driveway. She goes around the corner to where their trash cans are. She lifts the lid off the trash can and she stands there and puts the day in the trash can. She psychologically unloads everything that happened during the day that was difficult for her. And when she feels it's all out, she closes the lid and she says, then I can go inside the house and be 100% present for my family. And it's made a huge difference in my life. So, think of something you can do that helps you let go. It's psychological, but it works holistically. Next slide. So just very briefly, because we're coming up on 45 minutes here, recovery. And this is something that I've been thinking about, and I'm actually writing my next book on pandemic recovery because we're all going to need it so badly. The first goal of trauma recovery should and must be to improve your quality of life on a daily basis, which is just a real compact way of telling us what we all need to do. Author Annie Dillard, who's one of my favorites, said, the way we spend our days is the way we spend our lives. And if our lives are just, fraught with stress and drama and chaos, we're not going to have a good life, and our days are not going to be good. So we want to improve our life on a daily basis. Next slide. Recovery. The main factor in achieving a baseline recovery, which is a return to healthy functioning and being well, is resilience. Resiliency is achieved by translating finely honed coping skills into action. Recovery is not about the absence of thought or feelings about the experience, but being able to live with it without it controlling our lives. And this is such an excellent, way to look at it. We can't let it control our lives, or we won't have healthy, happy lives. And that's something we all need to get back to. Next slide. So there's 3 phases. Phase 1 is safety and stabilization. We need to think of ways that are self-soothing practices, prayer, meditation, whatever, and enhance those self-regulatory skills. And what is that? That's thinking of all the bringing our lives in, bringing our personal boundaries in. How do we regulate our emotions? And the skills are, again, up to you. I can tell you what I do, but it really has to be about you. So that's the first thing we should start thinking about as we start thinking about recovery, which I firmly believe we all need to do. Phase 2, the remembrance and mourning. We can't just let go and not think about everything that's happened and all the people who have died from COVID and all the trauma and pain and suffering it has caused. And you find a safe place to process all of that, and then you let it go. And the phase 3 is reconnection and integration. And that's where we recognize that trauma is one part of life, not at the center, and we boost our compassion satisfaction levels. So that's a real, in a nutshell, recovery. But I think looking at the different things, you can apply them to your own life and say, self-regulatory skills. What can I do to regulate my emotions better? Find a good friend to talk to. Put it on paper. Talk to yourself. Be compassionate to yourself. Pray for guidance. Whatever it is you do, start doing it now and do more of it, because it will help you in the future. And it will help those around you as well. Next slide. So final steps to recovery: build that resiliency, spend time with supportive people, increase your creativity. Creativity heals and helps us to grow and change. Support your colleagues and practice those standards of self-care, which are very basic. Good nutrition, exercise every day, supportive relationships, the things that are healthy and make us well. And you have to figure out what that is in your own life. Next slide. So some words. I'm a word person, so I always like to lead people with words. Trauma is that emotional reaction following a difficult event. Empathy, we open our hearts to the pain and suffering of others. Compassion, upon seeing the suffering, we're moved to act. That's why we're caregivers. Compassion fatigue is a secondary traumatic stress. We take on the pain and suffering of others. And really all we're asked to do is to bear witness to their pain and suffering and offer support. Compassion satisfaction is the pleasure we derive from our caregiving work. Resiliency is that ability to bounce back. Recovery is the ability to return to a baseline wellness and exceed it, hopefully. Sustainability is the behaviors and actions that carry us through. Vulnerability is being fully open to a wide range of emotions. When we have high levels of compassion fatigue, we start to shut down our emotions. And that's why you get the denial oftentimes, because you won't allow yourself, to think about it, because you're afraid if you start thinking about it, it'll never go away. Work of Dr. Brene Brown. If you haven't familiarized yourself with Dr. Brene Brown, do. She talks about how we need to be more vulnerable to each other. And it's great stuff. It's just beautiful stuff. And integration, and that's the ability to connect the dots to achieve wellness. And integration is what we want in recovery. We want to realize that we've gone through some really rough times. We want to figure out ways, to deal with it, to let it go and move forward and integrate our wellness and our happiness and fulfilling life with the trauma that's always there. Next slide. 3 things in human life are important. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. Henry James said that, and I'll tell you that is what we need more than anything right now is kindness. Next slide. Oop, weren't the resources there? Excuse me, I don't mean to cough in your face. Okay, I'm going to go through these real quickly, and I'm going to give this to Stephanie so she can post it so you don't have to write. I see people writing copious notes all the time. I say, you don't have to do that. This is all available to you. You don't have to. You can just sit back and relax. So the first 4 things are mine from Compassion Fatigue Awareness Project, and I put them there because at this time I give you permission to use anything that's there to help yourself, to help others, to use for training, to help your colleagues, whatever. So the first one is www.compassionfatigue.org, and that's our website. www.healthy caregiving is the books that are available, and there's some downloads there. There's a Caregiver's Bill of Rights that's a free download that you might want to read. Oftentimes caregivers don't feel like they have rights, and they have rights just like anyone else. There's a Facebook, Compassion Fatigue Awareness Project Facebook, which is fun. I post articles and sometimes funny things. I mean, whatever comes my way that I think all of you would enjoy and would be useful to you that day. I don't post every day. I post when they come my way. TEDx, I did a TED Talk several years ago. It's 18 minutes long. The TED organization is absolutely amazing. You do a TED Talk, and they take it and they edit it and make you look good, and then they give it back and say, send it out. There's no cost or anything to it. It's just amazing. And I think about 175,000 people have viewed my TED Talk. So I highly recommend you do that because it goes over what I just talked about. And it's kind of, a good thing to use. I've heard that people are using it as a training tool. They're getting their teams together, watching it, and then opening dialogue. So please feel free to use it for that. Okay, the next one's the really important one, the ProQual.org, which is the Professional Quality of Life Self-Test. And that's Dr. Beth Abel-Stam's work. And again, free. There's no wrong answers, only truthful ones. GreenCross.org, if you're interested in becoming certified about compassion fatigue. Greater Good Berkeley, EDU. UC Berkeley has a wonderful science center, and they have a website that just gives you all kinds of wonderful things about mindfulness and happiness and trauma and self-test, and they're all free again. So that's a really good one. And then Trauma Recovery CA, which is Canada. That's where I found a lot of really good, easy to understand information on trauma. So those are just some things to get you started. And what I often hear from people is, yeah, it did. Once I read about it, I wanted to learn more, or I wanted to be able to do trainings for, my colleagues and my people. So those are some things that might help you. So that's it on my part. If there's any questions, and I understand if there aren't, because this is a lot of information and you might be processing it. I'm at patricia@compassionfatigue.org. If you have questions or need resources, please just write me. Or you don't want to ask your question today, but you have another question. Again, I'm not a mental health professional, but I will get you the resources you need. patricia@compassionfatigue.org.
Thank you,
Stephanie,
Patricia.
take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, just so important topic, that conversation.
Yes.
2020 was a tough year, and I'm afraid 2021 is going to be another rough one.
It is. We're not going to find balance for quite a while.
We're not out of the woods by no means, and it's going to be another tough year. So this is such a important topic and a message, and that's why we brought you here today. I know I heard you speak previously, so I wanted to share it. And again, anybody, I know, like Patricia said, this is a lot to take in. It's a very different kind of topic we've had than in the past, but if you do have questions for her, please submit them through either the chat or the Q&A. We do have a couple minutes for some questions, so please go ahead. I do want to hear a couple.
Thank you, Mary. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I do want to reiterate the copies. The recording and the slide deck will be posted to the ESRD NCC website. Usually takes around 3 business days, but it will be posted so everybody has a great opportunity to see them again, look at them, and like Patricia mentioned, all those resources that are at the end you can have access to.
Yeah.
But
and people will often say to me in the little chat, at the end, thank you so much. I knew all of this, but you reminded me of it.
Exactly.
For someone to tell you, I've had people come up to me during a presentation and they're literally crying. They have tears in their eyes and they're really crying. And they say, thank you for giving me permission to take care of myself. And that always stuns me because here I am, a stranger. And no one has ever told that person, you need to take care of yourself and think about yourself. And that's what happens to caregivers.
Well, right. And there's that question in there. Patricia says, I'm a caregiver for my husband that does home hemodialysis, and I struggle with compassion fatigue and guilt when I try to do something just for myself. I know I have the options of respite care, but I know he is healthier at home. Any suggestions?
Oh, my goodness. You're a saint. You're a saint. I would make a little bit of room for some help because oftentimes the caregiver ends up to be the one who's sick. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard. You can't deplete yourself. You've got to fill yourself up, even if it means, of course, nowadays you can't go to the movies, but, if you could just take a couple of hours off to go to a fun movie or take a walk or go out with a friend and have a glass of wine and visit. You have to do that for yourself. And my guess is your husband would understand. He wants you to take care of yourself too. And I hear that a lot. Well, no one can take care of my loved one as well as I can. No, you're right. No one can. But someone can give you a little respite so that you can take care of yourself better, to take care of him better. I don't know if that helps, but I somehow you're going to have to find time for yourself to fill up. The rhythm of a healthy caregiver daily is deplete, fill up, deplete, fill up. And it sounds like what you're doing is deplete, deplete, deplete. And that's not going to serve you well, I can tell you.
Right. I do have a question here. It says, ask, what's the difference between compassion, fatigue, and burnout? It sounds the same to me. Pretty much.
And like I said, the psychologists and the psychiatrists and, the top minds in our country are working on that because they all have kind of pieces of each other. Compassion fatigue is a secondary traumatic stress, okay? Burnout isn't necessarily a traumatic, let me say that again. Compassion fatigue is a secondary traumatic stress. We take the pain and suffering of others and we make it our own, okay? Burnout is something that occurs with actions during your day. You've got too much going on and then you burn out because you can't handle it. That's not a secondary traumatic stress. That's happening to you. It's primary. So there's a lot of things about it. The outcomes feel the same. You want to isolate. You want to be left alone. You might have emotional outbursts, but they don't form in the same way. And I don't know if that's helpful because, like I said, I'm not a mental health professional, but I know that they are working really hard to try to figure out these different terms and what they mean and how we explain to people, this is what you have. And burnout, you can take some time off and recover. Compassion fatigue, you've got to do a lot more work.
Okay, thank you. That helps, I think, hopefully. I have another question we have time for. What is the best way to work with an employer or HR that is not geared toward preventing burnout?
The best way to work with them to prevent burnout. That's a good one. No, it is, because lately I've gotten what I call snarky when I talk to business leaders or the owner of the president or CEO of an organization or an owner of a business is in my audience, and I know that they stayed on, which I give them kudos for staying on. Oftentimes they introduce me and then they leave. And I feel like saying, hey, you come back and sit. You're the one that needs to hear this. But I tell them, 5 o'clock yoga where you bring somebody in and people can stay after work and do yoga with their colleagues, or fitness, a percentage off at your local fitness center. Of course, these are all things that go on normally, not during COVID, but things like that are really nice, but they really don't help people that much. At 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, people want to go home. They want to be with their loved ones, not so much their colleagues that they spent the day. So I tell them what you need to do: flexible work hours, better benefits, more pay. These are the things that help people, not 5 o'clock yoga at the end of the day. That's a nice little tidbit, but it doesn't help. We need to change businesses to understand what people need. And I feel the same way about education. Schools need to do the same. I have a lot of teachers in my life, and the kids come to school, especially teenagers. They come to school at 8 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're still asleep. That's not productive, and it's not healthy for our society. We need to change the way, the flexibility to allow people to work from home, I think, is going to stick, because businesses are realizing that this is pretty smart.
Yep.
And it's helping our world. My gosh, look at our gas emissions and things like that. It's so much healthier. Our air is healthier. People are healthier because they're wearing masks. They're not getting the flu and colds and pneumonia. And these reports are phenomenal. And I hope that, we don't go back to doing things the old way, because it didn't help us. It ruined our world. And of course, I'm an animal lover. I mean, the deer come right up to the windows at my house now. It's like, we know we're safe. They're safe on the island anyway, but,
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps, but I think, make an appointment, talk to someone and ask what are the possibilities that we can change things.
Right.
People have to get together and say, we need this. And the flexibility is very, very important, particularly if you're a caregiver and you need to get someone taken care of before you go off to work. The sandwich generation, they're getting the kids off and they're taking care of their elderly parents. I was that person for 2 years, and I'll tell you, it was a single mom. It was rough. It was really rough. And I luckily was working with an organization that just allowed total freedom, because they knew I'd get my work done, and they were very sympathetic to it. So I was fortunate. But the ones that aren't, I don't know how they do it.
Well, thank you, Patricia, again, for this really wonderful and important topic today. We really appreciate your time and all that you're doing. So I think we'll real close to the top of the hour, so I think we're going to go ahead and just wrap it up. We just have a couple slides for everybody just to let you know. Our flu vaccination toolkit is posted on our website. A lot of good information to share for providers. There's social media content, there's videos, there's material that is print ready, on-demand training and educational events. So please don't forget to visit our flu vaccine toolkit. It's located at esrdncc.org/flu today. Also, we have some inspirational posters that are available too. They are in PDF format for printing. They focus on psychological, physical health, emergency preparedness, and of course COVID-19. Again, visit the website listed below so that you can get those access to those printers and to those posters and print them if you so desire. Our Kidney Hub, it is a mobile-friendly web tool created with patients, for patients. There's links to all kinds of new videos and helpful resources that are added and updated daily. There is information about diet, nutrition. We have information about choosing home dialysis, COVID information, and transplant information. So visit www.thekidneyhub.org today for more information and download that app. And just our next COVID-19 webinar events, we have a patient-focused event coming up February 2nd at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and our next provider event is next Wednesday, January 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can visit, again, our kidneycovid infocenter.com to register for any of those upcoming events. Again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're so glad you took time to join us in this event. And everybody take care and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.